environmental groups that recognize that the federal government is right and that incineration is the best proven technology. The Earth Coalition called me yesterday down in Mecklenburg County, recognized they've got a serious household hazardous waste problem in the county, and the county has been unable to put a program together. The EPA estimates there's 10 to 30 gallons of household hazardous waste, paints, cleaners, oven cleaners, things like that, in each and every one of our homes. They want to manage those correctly. Rather than throwing them into your trash and then ending up in a landfill, they've called and asked if Thermal Chem would assist the Earth Coalition in providing a hazardous waste cleanup day, whereby we would in the county advertise and take these kinds of materials and treat them properly. Take them to an incineration facility, treat them the way the federal government feels is the correct way to do it, and thereby provide a good service to the community.
Now, there has been controversy over the Caldwell County incinerator. Now, is it fair to compare the two, what we're talking about?
Completely different.
Absolutely
not even
fair.
What's the difference?
Well, the Caldwell County incinerator was originally developed as an incinerator that sat on a solid waste landfill, and its original purpose was to burn boxes and pallets and trash to reduce the volume of materials going into a solid waste landfill. That was the original concept. From that incinerator, a company then purchased or leased the rights to use that incinerator. It was grandfathered into the federal system. It never operated with a hazardous waste scrubber system on it. It was an incinerator that never had the pollution control devices on it that would be under the current technology that is required both by the federal government today as well as by North Carolina's own standards.
One thing I wanted to comment on there, talking about grandfathering, we have looked at what is coming up in federal law. There are clean air regulations that are getting ready to be implemented. One of the reasons why we feel that the state is in such a hurry to implement this incinerator is because if they don't do it before these regulations go into effect, they will not be able to build this incinerator or site it in North Carolina.
Just the opposite, Chris, just the opposite. North Carolina's incinerator regulations, proposed incinerator regulations, as well as the air toxics regulations, are already more strict than the federally proposed Congress and Clean Air Act.
Well, we don't have those regulations yet, so we don't really know what we're going to have.
The air toxics regulations were passed last year and exist, and they were based on health risk standards that the North Carolina Academy of Science developed. And they're based on what's called 1 × 10⁻⁴. And that's the new level that the federal regulations are trying to go to. So North Carolina already has more stringent regulations. In addition to that, the Hazardous Waste Management Commission has already said that because of the regulations that are required, we would even meet 100 times more strict regulations than that. Well, so we're already 100 times past what is proposed in Congress.
And your track record is Caldwell County, in which you totally ignored your responsibility, yours being the state. You allowed this thing to function for years and years at the old regulation levels, causing people to literally die. And that's your track record. And you have nothing else to go by. So it's fair to compare this facility to that. You're woefully inadequate in the enforcement division. You're sitting here hiding behind the legislative mandate, and then when the darn thing gets into operation, you're going to hide behind the EPA rules and regulations, the Division of Environmental Management, which is totally incapable of even looking at the plant. They come out to a site one time in a year and call before they come to see if they're doing their job.
John, we have said over and over, we have said for more than a year, the Hazardous Waste Management Commission has recognized that the public, the general public, doesn't trust government in regulating facilities like this. And so the commission has suggested that on-site monitors be made available that would report to the county itself. And when we wrote our contract with Thermal Chem, we required them to give the county access that's necessary so that the county doesn't have to trust anybody. And the funding is available for pay for those people so that the county doesn't have to spend any money involved in that process. As well as recently, the senator from Senator Royal has proposed, or I get the impression there is some proposal for full-time, 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week monitoring in that process for any facility that's located in North Carolina. The commission has endorsed that idea.
The state is going to shift the burden of overseeing it to the counties again, just like was done in Caldwell County.
That's not what we said at all.
That sounds to me like what you said.
We just said full-time state monitoring, 7 days a week, 3 shifts a day, as long as the facility operates, in addition to local monitoring to oversee to make sure that you're comfortable with that level.
Let's talk about, just for a moment, Carolina Solite, which burns hazardous waste. and the situation that they have down there. The state was, because the citizens insisted that the state go down there and check on that situation because of all of the complaints of the citizens, they went down and they said they're meeting all federal and state regulations. Okay, then the Clean Water Fund asked the state health department to send a toxicologist down there. And what they found was that the Solite workers' cancer risk was documented by state health officials to be 2,000 times greater than the federal health standards allow. And do you think that the state has shut down or has fined or has done anything other than to tell these people to do the same thing that they told them to do 14 years ago, to stop dumping into the creek, to fix their aged equipment that was falling apart, and all of this after they went in for the second time, they made a report and found all of these deficiencies. Now that's the kind of state enforcement and regulation we can count on in North Carolina.
That's the way.
None.
And
None.
what we assume is happening there, and that Ms. Elmore has not said in her statements, is that that facility operates as an exception or an exemption to the federal regulations.
More loopholes that are
Of which the
available
federal
for the
regulations, Ms.
hazardous
Elmore.
waste management industry, and we're sick and tired of the
Well, let's
loopholes
talk about what
and the
thermal does.
grandfathering and all of those kinds of things that always take these people off the hook.
All right, what is thermal
Well,
chemistry?
for example, we monitor the health of our employees constantly. In fact, we retain Georgia Tech to help us in that analysis. We monitor every bodily function possible and on a
How
yearly
often is
physical.
this done?
Every year, and we maintain data. Over the 7 years of our operation, we've never had a health claim. We've never had anyone file suit against us for any environmental or health damages. In fact, we see absolutely no signs of anything that would concern us in regards to the health of our employees.
I want to address that.
And that's because we take the precautions, we invest a lot of money up front to do it right. 25% of our workforce is in the safety and compliance area. Safety and compliance is the most important thing in our company's approach to doing business. We just went over 1 million hours without a lost time accident, our industry record. And it's the approach of the operator, I think, that makes the difference. So, and I can't talk about how other operators work. I can tell you how Thermochem does its job.
But you
All
have
right.
had a couple of explosions at your plant, right?
Chris.
The one thing I wanted to mention is that the one reason that they haven't had any health claims is because the citizens of Rock Hill do not want Thermochem's money. I have been in contact with the citizens group down there. There are around 300 to 400 people who are extremely angry about the fact that Thermochem is in their community and is disrupting their lifestyle, as well as making the environment nauseous for them. There are smells down there that they cannot get rid of and they cannot track down, and everybody claims that it's not their responsibility. The citizens are reporting health problems such as respiratory infections, extreme sinus problems, bacterial infections, and other strange health disorders which cannot be attributable to a normal population without incineration.
Well, let's take a look at that, for example, and I think Darrell is correct. The standards we live with are 100 times more severe than what General Industry works with. In Rock Hill, we have the 6th largest air polluter in America who discharges 2.5 million pounds of emissions to the atmosphere, perfectly legal. We, on the other hand, compared that 2.5 million pounds, discharge about 300 pounds over that same course. They're the same materials, the same chemicals. In one case, they're used in production. In our case, these are residuals that have been recycled and then need to be treated effectively.
We're going to take a break here, and I want our audience to know we're going to expand our half-hour time to an hour today to cover this subject as thoroughly as we possibly can in that time frame. So stay with us. We'll be back in just a few moments. Our subject is the Granville County waste incinerator controversy, and I believe you had a response here, John.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to Mr. Kirk's proposition. What he's talking about is the people on site at Rock Hill who wear protective clothing, wash going in and out, I assume. They've never done any health studies off the site. Nobody has. And that's the biggest fear that we have. And that's part of the wonderful appeal of incineration is that all these companies have to do that are creating this noxious stuff, all they got to do is come put it in Thermochem's lap, and their liability is dissolved. Nobody can prove anymore where it came from and whose responsibility is, And that's the same position thermal chem takes. If it goes into the atmosphere, kills people, their position is, you can't prove it's us. So we're insulated from liability, the state's insulated from liability, and the people are still dead.
Do you do any studies outside of your employees?
We study our employee population. Let me tell you what we do. We have installed voluntarily, for example, air monitors outside of our facility that monitor the atmosphere as a second check against the instrumentation used in our stack for our
Are people
treatment process.
reporting to you that there are health problems in
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of any claims whatsoever. And all I know is that the Environmental and Health Department in South Carolina has done an extensive audit, and their data shows no increase over background levels. There's a stream that runs right beside our facility. The stream is perfectly clean. There is no discharge there. There's no pollution there. We voluntarily put instrumentation in place to monitor it, and we've gone a step further. We link that directly to our regulatory agency so they can read the instruments as we read the instruments. So if there's a concern, instrumentation will pick it up.
How do you prevent the problems that have been discussed here? How do you prevent not getting things out in the atmosphere?
It's a good question. You've got to have a good system, a good company, and a good approach up front. You got to make sure that you have your priorities correct. And for us, we never sit down and discuss anything until we discuss safety and compliance. It's how we've developed the best compliance record in the industry.
I think that one thing that we ought to address here in terms of liability is what EPA and some of the folks that work at EPA think about incineration. There's a gentleman named Mr. Hugh Kaufman, who is the Assistant Director of Hazardous Waste Control Division in Washington, D.C., who says that the main job of the waste management industry is to provide liability transfers that shift liability for hazardous waste from the companies that generate it to the taxpayers. These companies pay really large sums of money, which is very good for business, for thermal chem, to transfer their liability and their waste from the pockets of the shareholders of the companies to the citizens of North Carolina. That's what's going to happen here. When the state condemns the land and buys it up, they're going to retain ownership to it, and they're going to lease it back to thermal chem. Over the 20 to 30 year lifespan of this site, they're going to be burying 24,500 tons per year of hazardous ash, minimized waste, which is going to be concentrated. And when that 20 to 30 year period is up, the state is going to have the liability for cleaning up the problems on the site, as well as paying for the liability that they have incurred around the site.
That's not true.
Mr. Henry, let me ask you this. What is your time frame for having a site? And if you don't reach that time frame, what's going to happen?
Well, the regional agreement says that we shall have the facility operational by December 1991.
Okay, and what happens if you don't?
Well, if we can't have it operational, if we missed any of the milestones in the regional agreement, the agreement says that we're automatically out of that regional agreement. If we are automatically out of the agreement, if South Carolina and Alabama, the primary trading partners with North Carolina, close the gates to the facilities down there, then we will have a major problem. We'll have a problem in that North Carolina's companies will not be able to properly dispose of their waste.
No, or
They just have to dispose of it somewhere else.
There is no place else because
They are responsible and we're not. What's wrong with that?
the Attorney General's office will simply have to take it to court because it's unconstitutional for those states to block the transfer of
So what
waste
you're saying
across.
is that the responsibility should be the citizens of South Carolina, not the citizens of North Carolina.
We're saying we don't want
Which is
to
what
dump it.
Governor Campbell was so concerned about.
We say reduce it.
Don't produce it.
We want, Office of Technology Assessment has the research arm of the federal government, of Congress, has said that 50% reduction of toxic waste is feasible and reasonable in 5 years with existing technology, and that's what the citizens of North Carolina want.
Excuse me, Ms. Elmore,
And
50% still leaves 50%.
And
50% of 150 million pounds that went off-site in 1988 says that there's still 50% that has to be managed somewhere.
Okay, but that much didn't go out of state. A lot,
Well,
some
it
of that
still
got...
has to be managed somewhere, and regardless
Right.
of whose numbers you use. Mr. Pike and I had a discussion this morning, and Mr. Pike quoted 30% for the first year. No matter if we use your 50% number over 5 years or Mr. Pike's number of 30% the first year,
that's going to reduce it
you
tremendously, and we will not need these oversized facilities that require out-of-state waste in order to make them. economically feasible and profitable to
Mrs. Elmore,
to
are you
thermal
suggesting
chem.
there's no need for a facility?
I'm saying there's no need for incineration or landfill in the state of North Carolina. That's
What are we
exactly
going to
what
do
I'm
with the
going to say.
landfillable and the incinerable waste that North Carolina generates?
There are other ways that you can treat that
How?
waste.
Well, the first thing
You
you
know
could do,
They
how.
quit making it.
No, I don't know, because
You
the
can
federal
reduce
government
it, and
prescribes incineration, for example,
But
is
it's the
for
last
80%
one.
of the volume. And at the same time, the EPA is going to add 1.8
80
million
no,
metric
not
tons
80%
of
the
new
volume.
waste that are now going to be
New waste.
categorized as hazardous are going to come into the system. So not only do we have what we currently exist, but the system's going to grow about fourfold.
What's
with new
happening
waste.
to this waste now? I mean,
It is being managed in various facilities over the country. North Carolina predominantly ships almost all of its waste out of state that it ships off-site.
North Carolina is the lowest producer of these 5 states in the agreement. And with a 50% reduction of our waste, it would take very little for North Carolina to be able to manage its own waste within its own borders.
how can we reduce it?
well, the first way is to start putting some money where the paper is. Right now we have the Pollution Prevention Pays program, which is a model for the country. The only problem is that the legislature and the governor have saw fit not to give this particular office the monies that they need in order to practice toxic use reduction. Waste minimization is the way that the state is going today. All waste minimization means is concentration of waste. It is not an effort to actually encourage industry to change their waste, their chemical use practices. What we think should happen is that the government should help industry reduce the waste that they're producing. And if they're not going to make an effort to do that by providing the funds and the emphasis necessary, because right now the emphasis is on creating a market for the cheap disposal of waste, which is what an incinerator is.
I don't think that's true. And one of the things we provide, and I think it's important to note, is we support fully reduction and recycling. We've given many seminars on how to reduce volumes, how to recycle. In fact, this treatment facility will be an important component of recycling. As you recycle a stream, you take out the bad pieces of it, and you've got to treat that somewhere. It doesn't disappear. It has to still go out for treatment. That's what a facility like this does.
there's only one-
We should emphasize reduction and recycling. That is the most important thing we can do.
And yet the South has the worst environmental health in the United States. And the South has also become the nation's biggest waste dump. And this is documented in a study done by the Institute for Southern Studies. 2/3 of the nation's toxic waste is coming into the southeastern states, and we feel that the whole trend is for the Northeast and the other industrial sections of the country to dump it on Dixie. We've been hearing this from the northern states. We've been hearing it from state after state, from Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey. In the boardrooms, they're saying, we'll get rid of our hazardous waste. No, these 5 states are developing way over capacity, and we'll dump it on Dixie.
That's
Now,
absurd.
that is what
That's
we are not
absurd.
going,
I mean,
it is not
it is
absurd.
absurd.
It is
It-
happening.
is
It's
that-
already happened.
It is-
Ms. Elmore,
66%
Ms.
has
Elmore, I
already
don't-
been brought here for treatment
May I?
and disposal.
May I complete my sentence, please? The circumstances are that the regional agreement is in among 5 states, and between those 5